On Christmas Eve, my parents threw me out with a suitcase. My brother smirked, "Let's see how you manage." I shivered on a snowy bench. Spotting a barefoot, purple-faced man, I handed him my winter boots. An hour later, 19 black BMWs surrounded me. The man said just one sentence. The suitcase hit the porch before I did. I remember the exact sound it made, a dull thud followed by the scrape of leather against frozen wood. My mother had thrown it with more force than I thought she possessed, her arm following through like she was pitching a fastball. The contents shifted audibly inside, clothes, toiletries, the remnants of a life I hadn't realized was already over. Her face was a mask of cold fury as she stood in the doorway, her silk blouse immaculate, her pearls catching the light from the crystal chandelier behind her. Patricia Ashworth, née Montgomery, had spent 53 years cultivating the appearance of aristocratic composure. Even now, expelling her only daughter into a winter storm, she looked like she was posing for a portrait. Snow had just started to fall, fat flakes drifting down like they belonged in some picturesque Christmas card. Through the windows behind her, I could see the 12-foot tree we had decorated together just 3 days ago, its lights twinkling with cruel cheerfulness. The irony wasn't lost on me. "You have 5 minutes to get off this property," she said, her voice steady and terrifyingly calm. 25 years of motherhood, and this was the tone she chose for our final conversation. I scrambled to my feet, my knee stinging from where it had connected with the frozen porch boards. "Mom, please. Can we just talk about this? Whatever Marcus told you, your brother didn't tell me anything I didn't already suspect." She stepped aside, and there he was. Marcus. 28 years old, 3 years my senior, standing in the warm glow of the foyer with that insufferable smile spreading across his face. He'd always had our parents wrapped around his finger, but this was something else entirely. He was wearing one of his expensive cashmere sweaters, the kind that cost more than my monthly car payment, and holding a crystal tumbler of something amber. Behind him, the house smelled like cinnamon and pine and roasting ham, all the sense of the childhood Christmases I would never have again. Our grandmother's antique clock chimed in the hallway, marking the half-hour. 10:30 in the evening. In 90 minutes, it would officially be Christmas Day. "Come on, Lise," he said, leaning against the doorframe like he was watching a mildly entertaining television program. The smirk on his face was one I recognized from 1,000 childhood slights, the broken toys blamed on me, the parties I wasn't invited to, the casual cruelties that our parents never seemed to notice. "Did you really think you could hide it forever?" My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what he meant, and the worst part was that I hadn't been hiding anything. I'd been protecting them. All of them. 3 months ago, I'd stumbled onto something I was never meant to see. I worked as a junior forensic accountant at Brennan & Associates, a mid-size firm that specialized in fraud detection and financial investigations. It was a quiet job, methodical work that suited my temperament. I'd never wanted the spotlight, never craved the corner office or the executive title. I just wanted to do good work and build something stable. My father had asked me to help him organize some financial documents for the family trust. "Standard stuff," he'd said. Just some filing that his assistant couldn't handle, nothing that required the expertise I'd spent 4 years developing. He'd made it sound like a favor, a chance for us to spend time together during the slow holiday season. I'd been touched by the invitation. My father and I had never been particularly close. He was the sort of man who showed affection through provision rather than presence, always working, always building, always somewhere more important than wherever I was. What I found instead was a labyrinth of shell companies, offshore accounts, and transfers that made my blood run cold. My father, the esteemed Richard Ashworth, philanthropist and pillar of the community, had been systematically embezzling from the foundation he chaired. The Ashworth Foundation for Children's Health, which provided medical care to underprivileged families across 3 states, which had his name carved in marble above its entrance, which had been featured in national magazines as an example of selfless giving. Not just skimming, either. We were talking millions over the past decade, siphoned through a network of fake vendors and inflated contracts that would have been almost impossible to detect without the exact training I had received. I confronted him privately, in his study on a Wednesday evening when my mother was at her book club and Marcus was traveling for business. The conversation lasted almost 2 hours. I'd shown him my findings, walked him through the evidence piece by piece, watched his face cycle through denial, anger, bargaining, and finally what I thought was acceptance. He looked old in that moment, diminished somehow, like the weight of his secrets had been physically crushing him. He promised he would make it right. Begged me to give him time, to let him handle it quietly so that the foundation could continue its work without scandal. The children who depended on those services didn't deserve to suffer for his mistakes, he said. He'd looked me in the eye and sworn that he was working on a plan to return every cent, that he'd already contacted a lawyer about the best way to unwind the damage without destroying everything he'd built. I believed him because he was my father. Because I wanted to believe that the man who had taught me to ride a bicycle and checked under my bed for monsters was capable of redemption. Because the alternative, turning him in, destroying our family, sending my own father to prison, was too terrible to contemplate. Marcus had found my notes 3 days ago. The spreadsheets I'd compiled, the timeline of discrepancies, the draft of the letter I'd been preparing to send to the Foundation's board if my father didn't follow through by the new year. I hadn't even finished it. The document was riddled with incomplete sentences and placeholder text, more a therapeutic exercise than an actual threat. The whole thing was meant as leverage, a last resort to force him to do the right thing. I still don't know how Marcus found the files. My laptop was password protected, the documents were encrypted, and I'd been careful never to access them on the home network. But Marcus had always been clever about getting into places he didn't belong. Our parents praised his resourcefulness. I called it invasion of privacy. But Marcus hadn't seen the documents as evidence of our father's crime. Marcus had seen an opportunity. "You were going to destroy this family," my mother said, and there was something in her voice that frightened me more than her anger. Conviction. She genuinely believed what she was saying. "After everything we've given you. The private schools, the trips abroad, the connections that got you that job. And this is how you repay us?" "I was trying to help Dad," I said, my voice cracking. "If anyone else finds out what he's done, no one is going to find out anything." My father appeared behind my mother, his face impassive. He was wearing his favorite cashmere sweater, the one he always wore on Christmas Eve. "I've taken care of it. The documents have been destroyed. Your access to the family systems has been revoked. And as of this moment, you are no longer a beneficiary of the Ashworth Trust." The words hit me like physical blows. 16 years of being the dutiful daughter, the quiet one who never caused problems, the one who graduated with honors and took the sensible job and never asked for more than her fair share. Erased. Just like that. "You can't do this," I whispered. "Watch us," Marcus said. He pulled something from his pocket, a manila envelope, and tossed it at my feet. "Those are the legal documents. Dad's lawyer worked overtime to get them ready. Consider yourself officially disinherited." I stared at the envelope in the snow, watching the flakes accumulate on its surface. My mind was racing, trying to process what was happening, trying to find some angle I'd missed, some way to make them understand that I hadn't been trying to hurt anyone. But the harder I tried to think, the more the cold seemed to seep into my bones. "The suitcase has some of your clothes," my mother said, her tone suggesting this was an act of tremendous generosity. "You have your car. That should be more than enough to get you started somewhere else. Where am I supposed to go?" "It's Christmas Eve." Marcus laughed, a sound that would echo in my nightmares for years to come. "Let's see how you manage. Isn't that what you always said? That you didn't need our money, that you could make it on your own? Well, here's your chance to prove it." He stepped back and closed the door. The lock clicked with a finality that felt like a coffin lid shutting. I stood there for a long moment, watching my breath cloud in the freezing air, watching the lights in the windows that used to be my home. Through the glass, I could see them moving back toward the living room, back to the fire and the tree and the presents that had probably already been stripped of my name. Life going on as if I had never existed. My car was parked in the driveway. A 7-year-old Honda that I'd bought with my own money, the one thing they couldn't take from me. I grabbed the suitcase and the envelope and walked toward it, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. The engine turned over on the third try. I cranked the heat and sat there, shaking, trying to figure out my next move. My phone was already lighting up with notifications. I'd been removed from the family group chat, my subscription to the family phone plan had been canceled, and a formal email from my father's lawyer confirmed what Marcus had said about the trust. My apartment was a sublet, arranged through one of my mother's friends. I had no doubt that particular arrangement would be terminated by morning. My job? Given the way my father's connections worked, I'd probably find myself unemployed before the new year. Everything I had built, everything I had worked for, had been balanced on a foundation of familial goodwill that I hadn't even realized was so fragile. I started driving with no destination in mind. The streets were mostly empty, everyone tucked inside with their families, their trees, their warmth. Christmas music drifted from the few bars that were still open. I passed a church where people were filing in for midnight mass, their faces bright with anticipation. Eventually, I found myself in Riverside Park, on the east side of town. It was a quiet place, mostly frequented by joggers and dog walkers during the day, occasionally used by college students for picnics when the weather was warm. My mother had organized charity walks here twice a year. I'd helped with the registration table since I was 14. At 10:30 on Christmas Eve, the park was deserted, the pathways empty, the only sound the whisper of snow falling through the bare branches of ancient oak trees. I parked near the entrance and got out, needing to feel something other than the recycled air of my car. The cold hit me immediately, slicing through my wool coat, finding every gap between collar and scarf, between glove and sleeve. I was wearing my good wool coat, the one I'd bought for job interviews, a deep navy blue that my mother had called sensible, and my leather boots weren't exactly designed for trudging through snow. They were Italian, a birthday gift from 2 years ago, with low heels and decorative stitching that did nothing for insulation. But I walked anyway, following the path that wound along the frozen river, watching the way the Christmas lights from the houses on the opposite bank reflected off the ice. Someone over there was having a party. I could see figures moving behind warmly lit windows, could almost imagine the sound of laughter carrying across the frozen water. The scene looked like something from a greeting card, the kind my mother sent to her society friends every December. Happy holidays from the Ashworth family, with a professional photo of us all smiling in coordinated outfits. What would next year's card say? Happy holidays from the Ashworths, -1 ungrateful daughter? There was a bench near the water, an old wooden thing with a brass plaque that read in loving memory of Eleanor Brooks, who loved this view. I sat down, feeling the cold seep through my coat immediately, and wondered if Eleanor Brooks had ever been betrayed by everyone she loved. I pulled my coat tighter and let myself cry. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the tears to freeze on my cheeks in thin crystalline trails. Long enough for my toes to go numb inside my boots despite the leather and the fleece lining. Long enough for the snow to pile up on my shoulders like a crystalline shawl, transforming me into something that might pass for a statue if you weren't looking too closely. That's when I noticed him. He was about 20 feet away, standing at the edge of the path where it curved toward a small gazebo that the city had built for summer concerts. A man, tall and thin, wearing nothing but a dark suit that looked expensive but was completely inappropriate for the weather. The fabric shimmered slightly in the ambient light, silk, maybe, or some high-end wool blend that cost more than my monthly rent. No coat. No hat. No gloves. No shoes. His feet were bare in the snow, and even from this distance, I could see that his face had taken on a purplish hue. The coloration was concentrated around his lips and ears, spreading down his neck. Hypothermia. The word surfaced from some first aid course I'd taken years ago, back when I thought knowing CPR might make me useful in an emergency. Stage 2, possibly Stage 3. He was in serious trouble, the kind that becomes fatal if left untreated. I stood up, my own problems momentarily forgotten. The situation demanded attention in a way that my self-pity did not. Hey! Are you okay? He turned toward me, and I saw that his eyes were unfocused, confused. The pupils were dilated despite the ambient light, another bad sign. He was probably in his 60s, with silver hair that had once been carefully styled. I could see the remnants of product holding certain sections in place, but was now disheveled and wet with melting snow. The suit, which I'd initially taken for black, was actually a deep charcoal gray, beautifully cut, clearly bespoke. His shirt was white and crisp, though the collar was open and askew. There was something dignified about him, even in his current state. Like a king who had somehow lost his way and wandered off the map of his own kingdom. I can't. He trailed off, looking down at his feet as if noticing for the first time that they were bare. His voice was thick, the words slurring together. I don't know where. I was moving before I made the conscious decision to do so. Some instinct had taken over, the same instinct that had once driven me to pull my neighbor's cat from a tree despite being terrified of heights. I reached him just as he started to sway, grabbing his arm to steady him. His skin was ice cold through the expensive fabric of his sleeve, the chill radiating up through my gloves. Sir, you need to get warm. Do you have a phone? Someone I can call? He shook his head slowly, still staring at his feet. The motion was sluggish, uncoordinated. They took everything. The car. My phone. I was walking home, and they. He seemed to lose his train of thought, his words dissolving into silence like snowflakes melting on warm skin. Mugged. He'd been mugged on Christmas Eve, stripped of his coat and shoes and left to die in the cold. The cruelty of it made my throat tight. Who does that to an elderly man? Who takes a stranger's shoes in December and walks away knowing they might not survive the night? But I knew the answer to that question, didn't I? People who saw vulnerability and chose to exploit it. People who measured their own gain against another's suffering and decided the math worked in their favor. People like my family. I looked around desperately, but there was no one else in the park. The walking paths stretched empty in both directions, pristine snow unmarred by footprints. The nearest building was a maintenance shed at least a quarter-mile away, a squat structure I passed on my way in. My car was closer, but getting him there in his condition would take time he might not have. His movements were becoming more sluggish by the minute. I could feel him leaning against me more heavily, his weight shifting as his body began to fail him. His feet? I kept looking at his feet. They were the color of raw meat in some places, mottled with white patches in others that suggested frostbite was already setting in. Tissue damage. The kind that could lead to amputation if left untreated. The kind that happens when someone has been walking barefoot through snow for far longer than any human should. I didn't think. I just acted. I crouched down, my knees protesting as they sank into the cold snow, and unlaced my boots. They were good quality leather, lined with fleece, the warmest thing I owned. My feet protested immediately as I pulled them off and set them in the snow. The cold was shocking, a sharp blade of sensation that cut through everything else. My stockings were thin, barely adequate for walking from a heated car to a heated building, certainly not designed for direct contact with December ground. "Here," I said, straightening up. "Put these on." He looked at me with something like wonder, his unfocused eyes sharpening slightly as he processed what I was offering. "I can't take your shoes. You'll freeze. I have a car nearby. I'll be fine. You won't be if you don't get something on your feet right now." I pressed the boots into his hands, feeling how cold his fingers were even through my gloves. After a moment of hesitation, during which I genuinely worried he might refuse out of misplaced chivalry, he bent down to put them on. They were a little small, his feet larger than mine despite his lean build, but he managed to get them on with the laces loosened all the way. "Now we're going to walk to my car," I said, putting his arm over my shoulder to support his weight. He was heavier than he looked, solid beneath the expensive suit. "It's not far. Just keep moving. One foot in front of the other. Can you do that?" "I think so," he said, and there was something like clarity returning to his voice. The walk was agony. Every step drove the cold deeper into my stockinged feet. By the time we reached the parking lot, I couldn't feel my toes at all. But the man was talking more coherently, color slowly returning to his face, and that made it worth it. I got him into the passenger seat and cranked the heat to maximum. Then I climbed in the driver's side, tucking my frozen feet up under me on the seat, trying to ignore the stabbing pain as they started to thaw. "I'm going to take you to the hospital," I said. "You need to be checked out." "No hospital." His voice was firmer now, more authoritative. I need to make a call. Do you have a phone?" I handed him my phone, watching as he dialed a number from memory. His fingers were still clumsy from the cold, but he managed it on the second try. "It's me," he said when someone answered. "I'm alive. Track this number and send everyone." He paused, listening. "Yes, everyone. I'll explain when you get here." He ended the call and handed the phone back to me. There was something different in his expression now, something sharp and calculating that hadn't been there before. "Thank you," he said. "For the boots. For everything. You may have just saved my life. Anyone would have done the same." He shook his head slowly. "No. They wouldn't have. I've been walking for over an hour. 7 people saw me. 5 of them crossed the street to avoid me. 2 of them told me to call a shelter." He looked down at the boots on his feet. "You're the only one who stopped. The only one who gave me the coat off your back, so to speak." "I didn't give you my coat. Just my boots." A faint smile crossed his face. "Same principle." He extended his hand. "I'm Victor. Victor Mendez." I shook it, his grip surprisingly strong despite what he'd been through. "Elise Ashworth." "Ashworth." He repeated the name like he was filing it away for later. "Tell me something, Elise. What were you doing crying alone in the park on Christmas Eve?" I hadn't realized my tear-stained face was so obvious. For a moment, I considered deflecting, giving him some vague excuse about holiday stress. But there was something about his eyes, the way he looked at me with genuine curiosity rather than pity, that made me want to tell the truth. "My family threw me out tonight. I found out my father has been stealing from his charity for years, and when I tried to get him to make it right, my brother used it to turn everyone against me. As of about 2 hours ago, I have no family, no apartment, and probably no job." Victor listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "So we are both, in our own ways, people who have lost everything tonight. What happened to you? Before the mugging, I mean." He was quiet for a long moment. I attended a board meeting this afternoon. The company I built from nothing, the company I've led for 37 years. My sons and my nephew decided it was time for a change of leadership. They staged a coup, you might say. Had me removed from the building by security. When I tried to drive home to regroup, my car was stopped by 3 men in masks who took my wallet, my phone, my watch, and apparently my shoes and coat. They left me on the side of the road about 4 miles from here. Your own sons did this? They've wanted me out for years. I suppose they finally decided they couldn't wait any longer for me to retire on my own terms. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I built Mendez Industries from a single repair shop in a garage. We now have 47,000 employees across 12 countries. And tonight, my children decided that means nothing. Mendez Industries. I knew that name. Everyone knew that name. It was one of the largest technology infrastructure companies in the country, responsible for everything from data centers to satellite communications. And Victor Mendez was. Victor Mendez was a billionaire. One of the richest men in the state. I stared at him, suddenly aware of how absurd this whole situation was. A billionaire, mugged and left for dead, saved by a disinherited accountant with frozen feet. It sounded like something out of a bad novel. You're Victor Mendez, I said stupidly. I was under the impression we'd established that. No, I mean, Mendez Industries. That's you. Guilty as charged. He studied my face. Does that change things? I just gave my boots to a billionaire. He could probably buy the factory that made them. At the moment, I don't have enough liquid assets to buy a cup of coffee. My sons froze my personal accounts within minutes of my removal from the board. Very thorough, those boys. There was pride mixed with a bitterness in his voice. I taught them well. Perhaps too well? The headlights appeared first. They came from the road, one after another, a procession of black vehicles with tinted windows turning into the parking lot with military precision. The choreography was flawless, each car taking its assigned position without hesitation, without confusion, like a formation of aircraft landing on a carrier deck. I counted as they arrived. 15. 16. 17. 18. 19 black BMWs, forming a semicircle around my little Honda like an honor guard around royalty. For a moment, I genuinely thought I was hallucinating. The cold, the exhaustion, the emotional trauma of the evening, my mind had finally snapped, and was showing me impossible things. But then the doors opened, and men in suits emerged, some of them clearly security personnel with earpieces and alert postures, others with the polished look of executives who had been pulled away from Christmas Eve dinners. A woman in her 50s with steel gray hair broke from the group and ran toward our car, her heels clicking on the frozen pavement with remarkable speed given the conditions. Victor opened his door and stepped out to meet her. Hello, Angela. Victor. She embraced him fiercely, her composure cracking for just a moment, and I saw tears on her cheeks reflecting the headlights of the surrounding vehicles. When the tracking stopped, when we couldn't find you, when the hospital had no record, we thought the worst. 7 hours without any word. 7 hours of imagining every possible scenario. Very nearly. He looked back at me through the open door. But I had an angel intervene. The next hour was a blur of activity that seemed to belong to someone else's life. Paramedics appeared from one of the vehicles. Apparently Victor's security team traveled with their own medical personnel, a concept I hadn't even known existed, and I found myself being examined alongside him. My feet were wrapped in warming blankets, my vital signs taken, a cup of hot coffee pressed into my hands by someone whose name I never learned. Through it all, Victor stayed close. He answered questions from Angela, who I gathered was his chief legal counsel from the way she spoke with quiet authority about next steps and injunctions and board protocols. He issued quiet orders to various members of his team, directing resources and personnel with the practiced ease of someone who had been commanding people his entire adult life. But his attention kept returning to me, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, not pity, not gratitude, something more complex that I didn't have the energy to analyze. Finally, when the chaos had subsided and we were both seated in the back of one of the BMWs with the heat blasting, he turned to face me. My sons made a mistake tonight, he said. Several, actually. But the biggest one was assuming I would be conveniently dead before I could respond to their actions. He smiled, and there was something fierce in it. I have approximately 6 hours before the markets open in Tokyo. By this time tomorrow, I intend to be back in control of my company, and my children will be learning some very expensive lessons about the importance of respecting one's father. That sounds intense. It will be. Corporate warfare always is. He leaned back in his seat. But I find myself in an unusual position. For the first time in many years, I need help from someone I can trust. Someone who isn't connected to my company, my family, or any of the various factions currently jockeying for position. I felt the weight of his gaze, understanding dawning. You're talking about me. You gave me your shoes when I was freezing to death. A stranger, on the worst night of your life, and you still had enough compassion to help someone worse off than yourself. He paused. I've run background checks on potential executives that were less revealing than that single act. I'm a junior forensic accountant. I'm not exactly corporate takeover material. You discovered a fraud that had been hidden for over a decade. You documented it thoroughly enough to threaten a man with considerable resources. And when threatened yourself, you chose ethics over self-preservation. He raised an eyebrow. That sounds exactly like corporate takeover material to me. One sentence. That's what it came down to. Victor Mendez looked at me in the back of that warm car, snow still melting in his silver hair, my boots still on his feet, and said the one sentence that would change my life forever. Come work for me, and together we will teach our families what it means to betray the people who love them. Update 1, 3 weeks later. I should probably explain what happened next, because the messages have been flooding in and I owe everyone the full story. The response to my original post was overwhelming, hundreds of comments, thousands of upvotes, and more direct messages than I can possibly respond to individually. People want to know if this is real, if Victor Mendez is who he says he is, if I'm okay. The answer to all three questions is yes, though the details are more complicated than I could have imagined. When Victor offered me a job that night, I thought he was being impulsive. Grateful, certainly, but not exactly rational. The man had almost died of hypothermia, he'd just been ousted from his own company by his own children, and he was making major employment decisions in the back of a borrowed car at midnight on Christmas. Anyone would be a little unstable under those circumstances. I figured he'd forget all about me once he was warm and safe and surrounded by his real advisors. But I was wrong about Victor Mendez. The one thing that man never is impulsive. The 6 hours before the Tokyo markets opened were the most intense of my life. Victor had Angela drive us to a private airfield outside the city limits, where a Gulfstream G650 was waiting, one that wasn't connected to Mendez Industries and therefore hadn't been locked down by his sons. The aircraft was registered to a holding company in Delaware that Victor had established decades ago, long before his children were old enough to scheme against him. By 2 a.m., we were in the air heading to Washington, D.C., where Victor maintained a residence that had been purchased under an LLC his children didn't know about. Rule 1 of corporate succession, he told me as we cruised above the clouds, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber glow. Never let your replacements know everything. My father taught me that when I was 23, and I've never forgotten it. I sat across from him in a leather seat that probably cost more than my car, wrapped in a cashmere blanket someone had produced from a closet, still processing the rapid transformation of my circumstances. 6 hours ago, I had been crying on a park bench. Now I was on a private jet with a billionaire, flying toward what he promised would be the beginning of a beautiful counterattack. The DC house was a brownstone in Georgetown, elegant but not ostentatious, tucked away on a tree-lined street that looked like something from a historical preservation catalog. Angela had assembled a team of lawyers and a handful of executives who had remained loyal to Victor during the coup. They were waiting for us when we arrived, laptops open, coffee brewing, legal documents spread across a mahogany dining table that had probably hosted senators and cabinet members. I learned more about corporate structure in those first few hours than I had in 2 years of business school. Victor's sons, Garrett and Dominic, had exploited a technicality in the company's bylaws to call an emergency board meeting. They presented falsified evidence suggesting their father was suffering from cognitive decline, including doctored emails, manipulated medical records, and testimony from a psychiatrist who had never actually examined Victor. They convinced enough board members that immediate action was necessary to protect shareholder value, playing on existing concerns about Victor's age and management style. The vote to remove Victor as CEO had passed 12-9, with 3 abstentions from directors who smelled something wrong but weren't brave enough to oppose the majority. What they didn't anticipate, Angela explained, spreading a complex organizational chart across the table, is that Victor saw this coming 3 years ago and made certain preparations. The moment Garrett started having private dinners with board members, Victor knew the clock was ticking. The preparations were impressive, bordering on paranoid, but I was starting to understand that paranoia was simply good planning when you had enough enemies. Victor held his shares through a complex web of trusts and holding companies, many of which had veto power over specific corporate actions. His sons thought they controlled the company, but in reality, they controlled a shell that couldn't make any major decisions without the approval of entities still loyal to Victor. They couldn't sell assets, couldn't issue new shares, couldn't approve executive compensation above a certain threshold. They could sit in the corner office and give orders, but those orders would hit invisible walls at every turn. They can sit in my chair, Victor said, his voice cold with satisfaction. But they can't actually do anything with it. By the time they realize that, it will be too late. My role, initially, was to analyze the financial evidence his sons had presented to the board. The documents purporting to show cognitive decline were actually a mix of forged medical records and manipulated communications, clever work, but not clever enough to fool someone trained in forensic accounting. It took me less than 6 hours to identify enough inconsistencies to constitute fraud, timestamps that didn't match server logs, email headers that had been edited, financial projections that contained circular references no legitimate analysts would miss. Your father did the same thing, Victor observed, watching me work through the night, my eyes burning from the laptop screen. He thought he was clever, hiding his tracks through complexity. But complexity is just a different kind of pattern, and patterns can always be recognized by someone who knows what to look for. How did you know about my father? Angela ran a full background on you during the flight. Your family is quite well known in certain circles, the philanthropic community, the country club set, the kind of people who appear in society pages. Richard Ashworth's philanthropy has won him many admirers. Victor's expression hardened. Though perhaps fewer admirers once the truth comes out. I should have been uncomfortable with a reminder of my own family's crimes. Instead, I felt something close to relief. Victor wasn't pretending that my past didn't exist or that I came to him without baggage. He was simply filing the information away, assessing it, determining how it fit into his broader calculations. What do you want me to do? I asked. For now? Keep analyzing. Help me understand what my sons have been planning and who else might be involved. He paused. Later, once I've secured my position, I want you to help me build something better. A company where this kind of betrayal isn't possible, because the culture doesn't allow it. I nodded, and went back to work. The first week was chaos. Victor filed counter-suits, emergency injunctions, and criminal fraud complaints against his sons. The business press went wild with speculation, and Mendez Industries' stock price fluctuated by double digits every day. Garrett and Dominic issued statements portraying their father as a senile old man being manipulated by opportunistic advisors, a narrative that might have worked if Victor hadn't given a 30-minute live interview where he cited, from memory, the last 18 quarters of earnings reports and the names of every vice president in the company. Cognitive decline, one commentator said afterward. Victor Mendez has forgotten more about business than most of us will ever learn. The second week, things started to settle. A judge granted a temporary restraining order preventing Garrett and Dominic from making any major corporate decisions until the ownership dispute was resolved. Several board members who had voted for Victor's removal began issuing quiet apologies, claiming they'd been misled. The tide was turning. That's when my family decided to get involved. I was working late in Victor's Georgetown brownstone, cross-referencing communication logs between Garrett Mendez and various board members, when Angela knocked on my door. Her expression was troubled in a way I hadn't seen before. Angela, who had remained calm through a corporate coup and a 7-hour manhunt for her missing employer. You have visitors, she said. In the front parlor. I advised against admitting them, but they were quite insistent, and security didn't want to create a scene on the street. I followed her downstairs, my heart sinking when I saw who was waiting. The front parlor was a formal room with William Morris wallpaper and antique furniture that probably belonged in a museum. My family looked out of place in it, too modern, too aggressive, like weeds that had somehow sprouted in a carefully maintained garden. Marcus stood by the fireplace, his coat still on despite the warmth of the room, flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize, lawyers, probably, from their identical dark suits and carefully neutral expressions. Behind him, my father sat in a wingback chair, his face pale but composed. He was wearing his signature navy blazer, the one he wore to every foundation event, the one that made him look trustworthy and benevolent. Elise? Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The smile was the same one he'd worn on Christmas Eve, when he'd thrown me out into the snow. You've made some interesting friends. A billionaire, no less. Our little sister, moving up in the world. Victor appeared in the doorway behind me. I hadn't heard him approach, but I felt his presence, steady and calm. I believe this is my home, Mr. Ashworth. Perhaps you'd like to explain why you've entered without invitation. The door was open, my father said smoothly, rising from the chair with the practiced grace of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating uncomfortable social situations. We simply walked in. No harm done. We're family, after all, Elisa's family. I'm sure you understand the importance of family, Mr. Mendez. The irony of that statement, coming from the man who had thrown me out on Christmas Eve, was almost physical in its intensity. I felt Victor stiffen beside me. I'm confident that my security cameras will show a different story. But we can discuss trespassing charges later. Victor moved to stand beside me, his shoulder nearly touching mine. What do you want? Marcus glanced at our father, then back to me. His expression shifted, became more calculating. We want to make a deal. The situation with Victor Mendez has attracted unwanted attention. The SEC has opened an inquiry into Mendez Industries' accounting practices, and as part of that inquiry, they've begun looking at connected parties. Companies that do business with Mendez. Foundations that have received Mendez funding. Including, unfortunately, the Ashworth Foundation. My stomach tightened. This was exactly what I'd feared would happen when I first discovered my father's theft. The investigation into Victor's sons had created ripples, and those ripples were spreading outward, touching everything in their path. Exposure wasn't just a theoretical threat anymore, it was imminent. You want me to make it go away, I said. We want you to come home. My father's voice was gentle, reasonable, the voice he used when he was at his most dangerous. This whole situation has gotten out of hand. We said things in anger, made decisions we regret. But you're still our daughter, Elise. We can fix this. Together. By fix this, you mean I should use my position with Victor to influence the investigation. By fix this, I mean we can help each other. Marcus stepped forward. You have information that could damage us. We have the resources to make your new life very comfortable. There's no reason this has to end badly for anyone. I looked at Victor. His face was unreadable, but I caught the slight shift in his posture that I'd learned to recognize over the past weeks. He was testing me, waiting to see what I would do. 3 months ago, I would have been tempted. The pull of family was strong, even a family that had betrayed me. The possibility of reconciliation, of restoring what had been lost, was seductive. But 3 months ago, I had been a different person. The Elise who stood in Victor Mendez's parlor had slept on a park bench on Christmas Eve, had given her boots to a stranger, had learned that kindness to the broken was more valuable than loyalty to the corrupt. No, I said. Marcus blinked. No? I'm not going to help you cover up a crime. Not for reconciliation, not for money, not for anything. I turned to my father. I begged you to make this right. You chose to protect yourself instead. Now you're going to face the consequences. You'll destroy us, my father said, and for the first time, I heard real fear in his voice. No. You destroyed yourselves years ago. I'm just refusing to help you hide the wreckage. The silence stretched. Then Marcus laughed, that same ugly laugh from Christmas Eve. You're going to regret this, Elise. When you're testifying in court, when the press is tearing you apart, when your precious billionaire friend realizes what a liability you are, you'll wish you'd taken the deal. Perhaps, Victor said mildly. But she won't be alone. Angela, please escort our guests out. And contact the authorities. I believe we have evidence of an attempted bribery of a witness in a federal investigation. My family left with police cars pulling up outside. I stood at the window, watching them go, and tried to feel something other than numb. You did the right thing, Victor said quietly. I know. I turned to face him. But it doesn't feel like a victory. Real victories rarely do. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that might have seemed paternal if it hadn't been so businesslike. Get some rest. Tomorrow we have a company to reclaim. Update 2, 6 months later. I'm writing this from my office on the 43rd floor of the Mendez Industries headquarters. The view from up here is spectacular, the entire city spread out below, glittering in the summer sun like a circuit board made of glass and steel. I can see the river from here, the same river that winds through Riverside Park where I met Victor on Christmas Eve. On clear days, I can almost pick out the bench where I sat crying, though that's probably my imagination filling in details that distance obscures. 6 months ago, I was homeless. Today, I'm the executive vice president of corporate ethics for a Fortune 500 company. Life is strange. Stranger than any story I could have invented. The resolution of Victor's battle with his sons came faster than anyone expected. The evidence of fraud was overwhelming, not just the forged documents they had used to remove him, but a paper trail of their planning that stretched back nearly 2 years. Neither Garrett nor Dominic had the stomach for a prolonged legal fight once they realized their father wasn't going to quietly accept defeat. Victor had resources they hadn't anticipated, allies they hadn't identified, and a determination that bordered on obsessive. A settlement was reached in March, hammered out over 3 days of intense negotiation in a conference room at a neutral law firm. Victor resumed control of the company, his sons were removed from all positions of authority, and the board members who had participated in the coup were replaced with individuals Victor selected personally. The terms included a non-disclosure agreement that prevents me from sharing certain details, but the broad strokes are public record. The Mendez family's civil war ended not with a bang but with a whimper, as Garrett and Dominic accepted their defeat and retreated to the comfortable obscurity of their trust funds. I could have destroyed them, Victor told me afterward, sitting in the same study where I had first learned the scope of his preparations. Sent both of them to prison, taken everything they had, left them with nothing but their names. The evidence was there. The prosecutors were interested. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the city he had helped build. Because they're still my children. Even after everything. Even after they tried to steal what I spent my life creating, even after they left me to freeze to death in a park. I don't want them in my company, but I don't want them in a cell either. Perhaps that makes me weak. Perhaps it makes me foolish. Perhaps it just makes me a father who can't quite give up on his sons. It makes you human. He laughed, a real laugh for once, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. High praise, coming from someone who's seen what humans are capable of. My father's case took longer. The SEC investigation expanded as they followed the financial trails I had first uncovered, and by April, criminal charges were filed. The Department of Justice got involved. Forensic accountants from 3 different agencies spent weeks untangling the web of shell companies and fake vendors that my father had built over a decade. The total amount stolen from the foundation exceeded $14 million, money that should have gone to sick children, to families who couldn't afford medical care, to the people my father claimed to serve. Marcus tried to cut a deal, offering testimony against our father in exchange for immunity. He didn't get it. The prosecutors had enough evidence without his cooperation, gathered from the very documents I had compiled, and they weren't inclined to show mercy to anyone involved in a decade-long fraud that had victimized thousands of vulnerable families. I was called to testify in May. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, sitting in that witness box, answering questions about financial records I had discovered in my own family home. The courtroom was packed, reporters, foundation donors, curious members of the public who wanted to witness the fall of a local philanthropic legend. My father sat at the defense table in a suit that looked too expensive for someone accused of stealing from children. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared straight ahead the entire time I spoke, his face a mask of studied indifference. My mother was seated in the gallery, surrounded by women I recognized from her various clubs and committees. She stared at me with undisguised hatred throughout my testimony, her lips pressed into a thin line. When I described finding the first evidence of fraud, she shook her head slowly, as if I were a child telling lies about something I didn't understand. But I told the truth. Every question, every document, every detail. I answered honestly and completely, even when the defense attorney tried to paint me as a bitter, disinherited daughter seeking revenge. I had nothing to hide, nothing to protect, nothing to gain from deception. And when it was over, when the judge thanked me for my testimony and I stepped down from the witness box, I walked out of that courtroom knowing that I had finally closed the door on the person I used to be. My father was convicted last week. 15 years, with eligibility for parole after 7. Marcus received 5 years for his role in the cover-up. My mother hasn't spoken to me since the trial, and I don't expect she ever will. I should feel triumphant. The family that threw me out has been brought low, their crimes exposed, their pretensions stripped away. If this were a movie, I would be laughing as they were led away in handcuffs, vindicated and victorious. Instead, I just feel sad. Victor understands. He lost his sons, too, in a different way. They're alive, free, building new lives somewhere far from his influence, but they're lost to him all the same. Sometimes, late at night when we're both working in his study, he'll stare out the window with an expression that I've learned to recognize. It's the face of a man who won everything and lost what mattered most. Do you regret it? I asked him once. Any of it? Regret is a luxury for people who had other choices, he said. I did what I had to do to survive. So did you. That's not something to regret. It's something to build on. He's right, in his way. What happened to us wasn't fair, but fairness isn't the same as justice. And justice, for all its costs, is still worth pursuing. My role at Mendez Industries has evolved over these 6 months. The corporate ethics division I lead now has real power, real resources, real teeth. We've implemented whistleblower protections, anonymous reporting systems, and a complete overhaul of the company's internal audit procedures. Victor gave me everything I asked for, and I've used it to build something I'm genuinely proud of. "You're making the company boring," one of the old guard executives complained at a recent meeting. "All these rules, all these checks and balances. Where's the room for creativity?" "Creativity within ethical boundaries is still creativity," I told him. "Creativity without them is just crime waiting to happen." He didn't have a response to that. Last week, Victor called me into his office for what I assumed was a routine meeting. Instead, he was sitting at his desk with a single document in front of him. "I've been thinking about the future," he said. "About what happens to this company when I'm gone. You're not going anywhere. The doctors say you're healthier than men half your age. Nevertheless." He slid the document across the desk. "I'd like you to look at this." It was a proposed amendment to the company's succession plan. The language was complex, wrapped in legal jargon, but the meaning was clear. Victor was naming me as his preferred successor. Not immediately, there would be years of preparation, training, evaluation, but eventually. Someday. The little forensic accountant who had given away her boots would run one of the largest corporations in the country. "This is insane," I said. "It's practical. Garrett and Dominic are out. The other candidates on the executive team are capable but conventional. You're the only one who's proven that she'll do the right thing when it costs her everything." He folded his hands on the desk. "That's the only qualification that matters, in the end. I'm still processing it, honestly. The possibility that this strange journey, which started with a suitcase on a snowy porch, could lead to something so extraordinary. It seems like the kind of story that happens to other people, not to girls who grew up believing they'd never be anything more than their family's quiet helper. But here I am. And tomorrow, I'll wake up and go to work and continue building something that means something. Not because I'm seeking revenge, or vindication, or even success. Simply because it's the right thing to do." Victor asked me once what I thought the moral of our story was. I had to think about it for a while before I could answer. "I think it's about choice," I finally said. "We don't choose our families, and we don't choose what they do to us. But we always choose who we become in response. My family chose greed and self-protection. Your sons chose ambition and betrayal. You and I chose something different. What did we choose?" I looked out the window at the city below, thinking about a snowy bench and a barefoot stranger and a pair of boots that changed everything. "We chose to be kind," I said. "Even when it hurt. Even when it cost us. And that made all the difference. Sometimes the people who should love you the most will be the ones who wound you the deepest, and the hardest battle you'll ever fight is the one to believe you're still worth something after they've finished with you. But here's what I've learned: your worth isn't determined by the people who couldn't see it. Every small act of kindness you offer, every moment you choose compassion over bitterness, every time you help a stranger even when your own heart is breaking, those are the things that define you. The world can take your home, your family, even your name, but it cannot take the person you choose to become. Hold on to your goodness like it's the last warm thing in a cold night, because sometimes, in ways you could never predict, that goodness will be the seed from which your entire new life will grow."